This is the world we live in. If we weren't surrounded by it every day, if we didn't take it for granted, we'd be dumbstruck by its very intricacy and brilliance. This is an ordinary, familiar wooden pencil. You might think a pencil is simple. Chances are you've been using one since before you could even read or write. But just because it's familiar doesn't mean it's simple. In fact, it's complicated, elaborate, beautiful, elegant. Its very existence is too improbable for any one person to truly comprehend. These are the basic materials that go into a pencil: graphite, cedar, metal, and rubber. But if you had all the elements of a pencil right in front of you, could you make a pencil? It's not as easy as you might think. In fact, no single person on the face of the earth could do it without the help of countless others. And this is the key to understanding the world. A pencil, just like you and me, is the end result of a vast and intricate family tree, a symphony of human activity that spans the globe. Through their work and knowledge, a vast number of people have had a hand in making this simple pencil. Unlike your family tree, this one begins with an actual tree. The most immediate ancestor of the pencil is a cedar tree in the Pacific Northwest. But the loggers who harvest the timber are also its ancestors. And these men don't work alone. They, in turn, are assisted by the people and industries that produce the saws, rope, and countless other tools that they use. These are also the ancestors of our pencil. As is the waitress at a nearby diner who sells the loggers lunch, to say nothing of the thousands of people involved in producing that simple midday meal. Across time and space, the web grows. Consider the roads, trucks, ships, communication systems, and the people who design, build, and maintain them. All of them are necessary to bring the lumber to the mills and the slat factories that process them. All of them are also the ancestors of the pencil. And even with the work of all these people, so far all we have is a stained wooden slat, a naked half of a wooden body of a pencil. But its family tree is larger and more extensive. The graphite is mined in China and Sri Lanka. At the pencil factory, it's mixed with clay and heat and other materials before it's extruded, dried, and baked in a kiln. People from different continents, different cultures, cooperate to bring these materials together with waxes and kilns and equipment from across the world. These too are the ancestors of the pencil. And the same is true of the eraser. With ingredients from around the world, it's the end result of a similarly complex and exotic branch of the family tree. As is the ferrule, the metal band made from material that is mined, refined, and shipped from all over the world. Each part of the pencil is the result of the collaboration and cooperation of millions of people. Together, they form a process that is constantly changing and adapting. A change in the availability or cost of material from one place might make another source more desirable, and the process changes and adapts fluidly. And there is a fact that's still more astounding: the absence of a mastermind, of anyone dictating these countless actions which bring a pencil into being. Each member of this family tree supplies only a small amount of the necessary know-how needed to make a pencil. They do so voluntarily, not because they necessarily want pencils or like pencils, but because by working to create them, they exchange their labor and skills for the wages that let them buy what they want and need. What you're seeing is the market at work, the spontaneous configuration of creative human energies, of millions of people with their various skills and talents organizing voluntarily in response to human necessity and desire, as if led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of the intention. Every second we are alive, we benefit from the products of voluntary, spontaneous cooperation. This is the modern world. It's miraculous, it's intricate, and it gets better every day, so long as people are free to interact with each other. If we can leave the creative energies of humankind uninhibited, there's no limit to what we can accomplish.
From the very beginning, economics has been concerned with explaining what makes human prosperity possible. This is the primary question addressed in Adam Smith's monumental treatise, which he titled An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. In this book, Smith explains that the economic precondition for society as we know it is specialization in trade, or what he called the division of labor. He opens the book with the following sentence, quote, "The greatest improvement in the productive powers of labor, and the greater part of the skill, dexterity, and judgment with which it is anywhere directed or applied, seem to have been the effects of the division of labor." Smith illustrates the importance of specialization, or the division of labor, by considering the advantage of having each worker in a pin factory concentrate on a particular step in production, rather than producing a pin from beginning to end. Through specialization, workers can become more skillful, use machinery that increases their productive powers, and avoid the loss of time from constantly changing activities. According to Smith, 10 pin makers, by specializing in different tasks, can produce about 48,000 pins a day. But if each attempted to perform every task in pin production for him or herself, Smith doubted that they could each make 20 pins a day, or 200 among them. Specialization in trade allows each of us to become far more productive than otherwise. At this point in human history, human beings are completely reliant upon specialization and exchange. Trade with other people forms the basis of our economic lives. We engage in countless exchanges every month, which are often facilitated by the use of money. Trade allows us each to specialize in one activity that we are good at, and to concentrate on becoming very skilled, knowledgeable, and productive at that one task. Specialization in the division of labor also makes it possible to adopt mass production technology. As the great Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises explains, the division of labor splits the various processes of production into minute tasks, many of which can be performed by mechanical devices. It is this fact that made the use of machinery possible and brought about the amazing improvements in technical methods of production. Mechanization is the fruit of the division of labor, its most beneficial achievement, not its motive and fountain spring. Power-driven, specialized machinery could be employed only in a social environment under the division of labor. Every step forward on the road towards the use of more specialized, more refined, and more productive machines requires a further specialization of tasks. Specialization is what makes it possible for each of us to create a lot more output than we could otherwise. But it takes more than extra output to create a real increase in productivity. A specialist produces much more of a product, or part of a product, than he wishes to consume himself. Producing lots of output is not productive unless it ends up in the hands of those who value it. So the advantage of specialization can be realized only to the degree that people can cooperate, with each specializing in the production of something that others want, in order to be able to acquire what he wants from the specialized production of others. The only way for this cooperation to occur, and thus the only way to realize the productivity of specialization, is through exchange. Adam Smith recognized the crucial connection between exchange and productivity when he observed that the extent of this division of labor must always be limited by the extent of the market. If you can exchange only with those in a small village, your ability to specialize productively is extremely limited. For instance, how many could afford to pursue careers writing novels, painting landscapes, or mastering musical instruments, no matter how great their talents, with only a few people to appreciate and reward their accomplishments? In such settings, most people would tend to become a jack of all trades, but a master of none. The smaller or more limited the market, the more limited the productive potential of specialization. The link between specialization and the size of the market provides another explanation of the importance of market cooperation based on private property and voluntary exchange. Cooperation is possible without markets, at least without markets as we normally think of them. Family members cooperate on the basis of intimate knowledge and shared concerns. Members of small firms can work cooperatively in response to a common objective and peer pressures. The same can be said for churches, clubs, and other relatively small social organizations. The cooperation within families, firms, and social organizations can be explained as the result of exchange relationships. But such relationships, because they depend on personal association and common objectives, are limited to relatively small groups. A key to the productivity of the market is that it greatly extends the range of cooperation and therefore greatly increases our ability to specialize productively. Obviously, the expansion of markets has depended on improvements in transportation and communication networks. But without the information communicated through market prices and the cooperation motivated by these prices, improvements in transportation and verbal and written communication would be insufficient to realize much of the advantage of specialization. Brazilians could communicate their desires for more denim clothing with a steady barrage of faxes, emails, and telephone calls to clothing manufacturers in every country in the world, with it being possible to ship clothing to them overnight from anywhere on the globe. But without the information communicated by change in relative market prices, Brazilians would be unable to motivate cotton growers, agricultural chemical producers, dye manufacturers, textile workers, truck drivers, airline pilots, merchants, and countless others to coordinate their specialized efforts to make sure that the denim clothing was made available in Brazil in the desired quantities and preferred styles. So again, the point is this idea of the invisible hand of the marketplace, which directs each one of us through the information and incentive contained in market prices to coordinate our actions with others and each work for the common economic interest of everyone else.
By now it should be clear that two individuals or two countries can increase the amount that they produce if each party specializes in producing something that they're good at. Right, but what if one of the parties is better at producing everything than everybody else? Could that country still benefit from exchange? Well, the answer is yes. And the first person to illustrate the logic of why, convincingly using a numerical example, was David Ricardo. David Ricardo is the second most famous classical economist behind Adam Smith. And one of the reasons why he's so famous is because he illustrated this idea or law of comparative advantage. So the law of comparative advantage just states that the joint output of trading partners will be greatest when each good is produced by the low opportunity cost producer. So we have a couple of terms here that we need to learn. Right? The first term is absolute advantage, and a country or an individual is said to have an absolute advantage at producing a good if it can produce that good using fewer inputs than another producer. So fewer labor inputs or fewer capital good inputs. An individual or a country is said to have a comparative advantage if it can produce a good at a lower opportunity cost. Remember the definition of opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is the value of what you have to give up when you make a choice, or in this case, when you produce something. So let's look at a numerical example that's similar to David Ricardo's original example in order to illustrate what these terms mean and why it's possible for a country that's good at everything to still benefit from trade. Here we have a table that summarizes the amount of labor hours that is required to produce an iPad or a shirt in the US and Mexico. So we're sticking with two countries and two goods just to make the example very simple. And let's say that in Mexico it takes 12 hours to make a computer tablet and 2 hours to make a shirt. And in the US it takes a worker 1 hour to make a tablet and 1 hour to make a shirt. So we would say that workers in the US have an absolute advantage in the production of both tablets and shirts because they can produce it using fewer labor inputs and fewer labor hours. Okay, but the U.S. does not have a comparative advantage in the production of both things. Remember, comparative advantage means that you can produce something at a lower opportunity cost. So in order to find the opportunity cost of producing a shirt or a tablet, we have to ask ourselves, well, how much of the other good did the country have to give up in order to produce it? So let's start by looking at shirts. Okay, the opportunity cost of producing one shirt in Mexico is 1/6 of a tablet. So for each shirt that's produced In Mexico, in that amount of time, a worker could have made 1/6 of a tablet. So the opportunity cost of producing one shirt is 1/6 of a tablet. In the U.S., the opportunity cost of producing one shirt is one computer. In the time that it takes a worker in the U.S. to make a shirt, they could have made a tablet. Right, so when a worker in Mexico produces a shirt and only has to give up 1/6 of a tablet, when a worker in the U.S. makes a shirt, the opportunity forgone is one entire computer. So the opportunity cost of producing a shirt is less in Mexico than it is in the United States. All right, now let's see who has a comparative advantage in producing tablets. In the United States, the opportunity cost of producing a tablet is one shirt, and for a worker in Mexico, the opportunity cost of producing one tablet is 6 shirts. So the opportunity cost of producing a tablet is much less in the United States. You only have to give up the opportunity of producing one additional shirt instead of 6. So to summarize, the United States has a comparative advantage in the production of tablets, and Mexico has a comparative advantage in the production of shirts. So the law of comparative advantage just states that the joint output of the two countries will be greater if each country specializes in producing the good that they have a comparative advantage in making. So if the United States specializes in making tablets and Mexico specializes in making shirts. Let's illustrate this using some numbers. So imagine that there's 24 hours a day that can be divided between the two activities, and without trade, each country spends half the time doing each. So under those assumptions, if Mexico spends 12 hours making tablets and 12 hours making shirts, they'll make 1 tablet and 6 shirts. And if the U.S. spends 12 hours on each activity, they'll make 12 tablets and 12 shirts. That information is just summarized in this table. It shows how much would be produced without trade under the assumption that production is split evenly between the two activities. Right, and now let's say that there's some specialization. Let's say that Mexico completely specializes in making shirts. So they spend all 24 hours making shirts. In that case, they would make 12 of them. And let's say that the U.S. spends 14 hours making tablets and 10 hours making shirts. In that case, they'd make 14 tablets and 10 shirts. So we can compare the situation without trade to the situation with specialization. And what it shows is that with some specialization in trade, the total amount of both tablets and shirts produced will be greater. All right, one final example from everyday life. Suppose that in a particular city, the best lawyer also happens to be the best typist. Should she type her own legal briefs? Well, before people are exposed to the idea of comparative advantage, they'll usually say, of course she should type her own legal briefs. She's the best at it, isn't she? The right answer is that no, she should focus solely on being a lawyer because her comparative advantage lies in providing legal services. Let's just illustrate this idea using some numbers. So suppose that the lawyer can earn $100 an hour doing legal work, and she can type 100 words per minute. And suppose that assistants can be hired for $10 an hour, but they can only type 50 words a minute. In this case, the lawyer has an absolute advantage in providing legal services and an absolute advantage in typing. But while she's twice as good as typing as the assistants, she's 10 times as good at offering legal advice. And well, under these assumptions, if she does her own typing, she saves $20 an hour from having to hire 2 assistants, but then she would lose $100 in legal work for a net loss of $80. So this just shows you that even if she is the best typist, she should still specialize in being a lawyer because that's where her comparative advantage lies. Well, that's it for this lecture. As always, I hope you got something out of it. Take care.